Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. If you're using this to fall asleep, get cozy, and relax, don't forget to subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Alright, let's get into the story. I recently started school again, and as part of my daily routine, I commute to Toronto from Monday to Friday via train and subway. The journey takes about 2 hours each way, so I've settled into a rhythm to make it bearable. I pull out a good book, pop in my headphones, and let some light music wash over me as I relax. Being from out of town, I'd heard plenty of horror stories about the TTC, Toronto's public transit system. People talked about bizarre encounters, creepy passengers, and chaotic moments. I figured most of it was just exaggeration, tall tales spun to scare newcomers like me. But last week, I was proven dead wrong in the most unsettling way possible. Rewind to a week ago. I just endured a grueling day at school, dragging myself through classes from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. I was exhausted, my brain fried, and all I wanted was to get home as fast as possible and collapse. I took my usual bus route to the subway station, boarded the train, and found a seat right next to one of the exit doors. It's a spot I like. It feels less claustrophobic, and I can make a quick escape if needed. For context, I was facing forward, my eyes occasionally drifting to the seat directly across the aisle, one row ahead of me. That seat was occupied by a woman in her 20s, Asian, completely engrossed in some game on her phone. She was oblivious to everything around her, earbuds in, fingers tapping away at the screen. Across from her, in the seat that would soon make my 40-minute subway ride one of the most disturbing experiences of my life, sat another woman. She looked to be in her 30s or maybe early 40s, with a gaunt face and a smile that sent chills down my spine. I don't know how else to describe it except creepy. Her lips were stretched into this wide, unwavering grin, and here's the thing, she never stopped smiling. Not for a second. The entire ride, that toothy, unnerving smile stayed plastered on her face like it was carved there. The subway car pulled out of the station, and we were on our way. For the first half of the trip, I tried to focus on my book, but I couldn't help noticing her behavior. She was fixated on a young woman playing her game. Every few seconds, she let out a soft, eerie laugh, muttering to herself in a low voice I couldn't quite make out. It was like she was having a private conversation, but her eyes never left the other passenger. Then it got weirder. She pulled a phone from her bag and started snapping pictures, not subtly either. She held the phone up, aimed it directly at the woman, and clicked away, capturing her face and whatever was on her screen. I was stunned. How the hell did the woman not notice this? She was so absorbed in her game, she didn't even glance up. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, trying to pretend I hadn't seen anything. About halfway through the ride, at one of the major stops, the Asian woman got up and left the car, still glued to her phone, completely unaware of the bizarre attention she'd been getting. That's when things took a turn. The smiling woman's head swiveled, and her gaze locked onto me. She turned her body fully to face me, her grin somehow growing wider, her teeth gleaming under the harsh subway lights. My stomach dropped. I knew instinctively that making eye contact would be a mistake, a big one. It was like every horror movie instinct kicked in, screaming, "Don't engage." So I fixed my eyes on a random poster plastered on the ceiling of the train. It was some ad for a community college, but I stared at it like it was the most fascinating thing I'd ever seen. Minutes dragged on, feeling like hours, as I avoided her piercing stare. She must have realized I wasn't going to look at her because she switched tactics. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her reach into her bag again. I braced myself, half expecting her to pull out something threatening. Instead, she produced a tube of toothpaste. I blinked, confused, thinking maybe she was going to brush her teeth or something equally weird but harmless. No. She unscrewed a cap, squeezed out a massive glob, easily half the tube, and started eating it. She shoved the stuff into her mouth, smearing it across her lips and chin, all while still staring at me and laughing that same soft, unhinged giggle. The sight was revolting. My stomach churned, and I had to swallow hard to keep from gagging right there on the spot. Somehow, I held it together, gripping my book so tightly my knuckles turned white. Her face was a mess now, toothpaste dripping down her chin, mixing with her relentless smile. She didn't seem to care. She just kept laughing, her eyes boring into me, like she was waiting for a reaction. I refused to give her one. I kept my gaze locked on that damn poster, counting down the stops until mine. When my station finally arrived, I didn't hesitate. I bolted from my seat, practically shoving past other passengers to get to the door. My heart was pounding as I stepped onto the platform, the cool air hitting my face like a lifeline. I made a beeline for the escalator, my legs moving faster than I thought possible. Halfway up, I couldn't resist. I hazarded a glance back over my shoulder. My blood ran cold. There she was, fast walking after me, her arms stiff at her sides, that same deranged smile stretching across her face. She was gaining on me, her pace unnervingly steady, like something out of a nightmare. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted the rest of the way up the escalator, weaving through the crowd. I burst out of the station and spotted my bus just as it was pulling up. I threw myself onto it, my chest heaving, and collapsed into a seat. As the bus started to move, I dared one final look back toward the station entrance. There she was, standing on the platform, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, still smiling that horrible, toothy grin. She raised a hand and waved at me, her laughter echoing in my mind even as the bus pulled away. I sank into my seat, my hands shaking, and tried to process what the hell had just happened. That subway ride was supposed to be routine, just another part of my daily grind. Instead, it left me rattled, replaying her smile and that wave over and over in my head. I don't know what her deal was, but I hope I never see her again. Back when I was 15 or 16, the summer months stretched out endlessly, especially after finishing exams. My friends and I lived in a small, isolated village, not quite swallowed by wilderness, but surrounded by sprawling fields, meadows, and pockets of dense forest. There wasn't much to do in a place like that, so boredom often pushed us toward mischief or adventure. My friend Dylan, the most daring of our group, though I like to think I was a close second, suggested we go exploring for the day. The idea sparked excitement in all of us. Why not? The days were long, the nights stayed light until nearly 11 p.m., and we were itching for something to break the monotony. So we agreed to venture out, a group of 6 or 7 teenagers ready to see what we could find. We prepared for the outing like it was a grand expedition. We packed water, snacks, and a few essentials. I made sure to bring my trusty penknife, a habit I'd picked up years ago and never went anywhere without. It was a warm, clear afternoon when we set off, the sun high and the air buzzing with a promise of a good day. We ambled through the fields, cutting through small wooded patches, laughing at each other's dumb jokes and swapping stories that got wilder with each telling. For hours, we wandered without a care, the village fading into the distance as we pushed further into the countryside. By around 6 p.m., the sun was still bright, but the light had softened, casting longer shadows. The air felt just a touch cooler, and the world seemed to quiet down. That's when we stumbled out of a small cluster of woods and found ourselves facing something we hadn't expected, an abandoned mill. We all knew it existed. Whispers about the place had circulated in the village for years, but none of us had ever been there. The last time we'd come close was in winter, when our parents warned us to steer clear. They said homeless people might be squatting inside, and as kids, we'd taken their warnings seriously. But now, fueled by summer bravado and inspired by YouTube videos of urban explorers poking around abandoned buildings without a scratch, we felt invincible. Those guys on the internet never ran into trouble, right? So we decided to check it out. The mill loomed ahead, its weathered silhouette cutting a spooky figure against the evening sky. It wasn't boarded up, but the windows were dark, like empty eyes staring back at us. The exterior was crumbling, overgrown with weeds, and the whole place radiated an eerie stillness. We exchanged glances, a mix of excitement and nervousness flickering across our faces. To bolster our courage, we pulled out our phones and switched on the flashlights. Someone, probably Dylan, joked that we'd beat the hell out of any homeless people we found, but it was all bravado. Deep down, we all knew if anything went wrong, we'd be sprinting out of there faster than we'd ever run in our lives. Those of us with knives, including me, gripped them tightly, the cold metal a small comfort against the unknown. We stepped inside, our flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. The air was musty thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. The main room was littered with debris. Empty beer cans, cigarette butts, and random bits of trash scattered across the floor. Graffiti covered the walls, some of it the usual crude tags, but others were more unsettling. "Get out and turn back," scrawled in jagged letters. We laughed it off, calling it cliché, but the words lingered in the back of my mind. To the right, a staircase led both up to the top floor and down to the basement. We decided to explore the main room first, poking around overturned furniture and rusted machinery. It was creepy but manageable, the kind of thrill we'd been chasing. Next, we climbed the stairs to the top floor. The wooden steps creaked under our weight, each sound amplified in the silence. Upstairs, we found what looked like a makeshift camp, tattered blankets, a few empty food cans, and a pile of clothes that hadn't been touched in ages. It was clear someone had stayed here once, but the dust and cobwebs suggested they'd been gone for years. The discovery made us uneasy, but we pressed on, telling ourselves it was just an old homeless shelter, nothing more. Finally, we couldn't avoid it any longer, the basement. We'd been putting it off, joking about how every horror movie taught us that basements were bad news. But curiosity, and maybe a need to prove we weren't scared, won out. We huddled close, a kind of brotherly comfort binding us as we descended the stairs. The air grew colder, heavier, and the darkness seemed to swallow our flashlight beams. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a narrow, bare concrete corridor. The walls were damp, and a foul smell hung in the air, growing stronger as we moved forward. Our lights barely reached the end of the passage, where a dark green iron door stood, its paint peeling and hinges coated in rust. We crept toward it, Dylan taking the lead, with me and my friend Harry right behind him. The stench was overwhelming now, a mix of rot and something sharp and metallic. My heart pounded, but I didn't want to be the one to turn back. When we reached the door, I grabbed the handle and yanked, but the rusted hinges screeched in protest and refused to budge. It took 4 of us, Dylan, Harry, me, and another friend, grunting and pulling with all our strength to force it open. When it finally gave way, the smell hit us like a physical blow, so vile that Harry doubled over, gagging and nearly vomiting on the spot. We shone our flashlights into the room, and what we saw froze us in place. In the center of the concrete floor lay the mangled remains of a dog. Its body was savaged, ribs exposed, legs torn off, and thousands of flies swarmed over the rotting flesh. The sight was horrific, beyond anything we'd imagined stumbling across. My stomach lurched, and I could feel the others trembling beside me. We were terrified, sickened, and desperate to get out of there. We moved to slam the door shut, hoping to block out the stench, and the image burned into our minds. But as we pushed the door, a piercing, almost inhuman scream erupted from inside the room. It was a sound that didn't belong to any animal or person I'd ever heard, a shrill, guttural wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and with a burst of adrenaline, I kicked the door as hard as I could. The metal groaned and scraped across the floor, slamming shut with a deafening clang. That was it, we were done. We turned and sprinted, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we tore through the corridor, up the stairs, and out of the mill's main room. We didn't stop until we burst through the entrance, the fresh air hitting our lungs like a lifeline. We kept running, our feet pounding the ground, until we were far enough from the mill to feel a shred of safety. Gasping for breath, we collapsed in a clearing, our minds reeling. We didn't talk much after that. The group consensus was unspoken but clear. We were going home. We took the back roads, avoiding the main paths, as if the mill might somehow follow us. None of us ever went back there, and to this day, I can't shake the memory of that scream. It haunts me, creeping into my thoughts when I least expect it. I wonder what would have happened if we'd gone into that room, if we'd seen whatever made that sound. Was it human? An animal? Something else entirely? I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. I've only shared this story with a few people, my roommates from the same town and some of the friends who were there that night. Even then, I don't talk about it much. Every time I do, someone inevitably suggests we should go back and find it, and my stomach twists. No way in hell am I going back. I've tried looking for the place on maps, but I can never pin it down. My friend who drove that night swears he's got the directions memorized, but I'm not testing that theory. This all happened when I was a junior in high school, growing up in a major city in southern Ohio. Just outside the city limits lay a cluster of smaller townships, one of which had a reputation as the rough, country bumpkin, redneck part of the area. It wasn't even in the same county, but it was close enough to feel like part of our world. Deep in the woods of that township, there was a local legend about a place called Hell's Church. The stories varied depending on who you asked. Some said it was an old church that burned down, now a hotspot for satanic rituals. Others claimed it was a full-on Satanist church that went up in flames during one of their rituals. Ohio's got a bunch of these Hell's Church myths, but this one was the closest to us. My guy friends, a group of us juniors itching for adventure, decided we'd play ghost hunters and check out the haunted spots around our area. We didn't really believe the stories. Most of us thought it was just dumb rumors, but we figured it'd be fun to scare ourselves silly. Plus, by junior year, most of us had cars or licenses, and that new freedom was burning a hole in our pockets. I was the most tomboyish girl in the group, always trying to prove I could hang with the guys. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat when it comes to creepy stuff, but I didn't want to look weak, especially since some of my closer girlfriends were tagging along. So one chilly November night, we decided to go find Hell's Church. We'd actually been to the area once before that fall, poking around an old barn and some railroad tracks on a nearby bridge, but we had to cut it short because one friend had a curfew. We didn't find the church that time, which was disappointing, but also a quiet relief for me. This time, though, we were determined. We piled into 2 cars, driving past the busier parts of our city and into the wooded, rural area where the church was supposed to be. I couldn't tell you the exact route, something about a state highway, then an abandoned access road past an old warehouse, and finally a dirt road. Early on, the dirt road was wide enough to drive, so we parked there. It narrowed further down, making it impossible for cars, and we spotted some no trespassing signs. We figured the signs were just to keep out kids like us, which didn't seem odd. Tons of teens probably snuck out here. We barely gave it a second thought. We hopped out of the cars and started walking down the dirt road, our boots crunching on the gravel. At first, it was just spooky in a fun way, dark, quiet, with gnarled trees casting weird shadows. We wander off the path now and then, checking out barns or clearings where we thought the church's chimney might be. The barns started getting creepier, though. They were filled with strange spray-painted symbols, stuff that looked like it could be a cult but was probably just bored kids messing around. What really got to us were the dead animals, cows, dried out and decomposed, their insides torn open. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe teens faking a satanic ritual, or animals that got trapped in the collapsing barns and were picked apart by scavengers. Still, it was gross, and I could feel the group's unease growing. My guy friends were hell-bent on finding that chimney, so they kept charging through the trees into every clearing we passed. Me and the other 2 girls hung back at the tree line, getting more nervous and annoyed with each dead-end search. Then we found a bike on the edge of the woods, a kid's bike, maybe for a 12-year-old. It was a little creepy, but we brushed it off as probably belonging to someone who lived nearby. We kept going and soon found another bike, older and rustier, but still small. We didn't talk much about the first one, just mumbled that it was nothing. A couple of the guys tried to hype it up, joking that the kids who owned the bikes probably got murdered, but no one was really buying it. We'd been out there for about 2 hours, and it was getting late. We were all more creeped out than we wanted to admit, so we decided to head back to the cars. I was relieved, ready to get the hell out of there and back to the safety of my house. But of course, things are never that simple. As we reached the cars, we noticed a road we hadn't seen before, heading straight up a hill through dense trees. At the base was a big metal gate with a road closed sign. We'd seen it on our last trip, but hadn't thought to explore it. Now, though, it called to us. We debated, split almost evenly on whether to go up. I was firmly in the hell no camp, but the drivers wanted to check it out, and there wasn't much choice when you're not the one with the keys. We climbed over the gate and started up the hill. The road was old pavement, cracked and crumbling underfoot, clearly built for cars ages ago. Someone had felled trees across it, deliberately blocking any vehicles. A few of us started muttering that maybe we shouldn't be here, that whoever did this really didn't want visitors. The others teased us for being scared, and peer pressure won out. We kept climbing. The road was steep, the trees so thick they'd blocked most of the moonlight. All I could see was the path stretching upward, the darkness pressing in. My breath came faster, not just from the climb, but from the growing sense that we were somewhere we didn't belong. Then suddenly, the trees parted, and we stepped off the incline onto a flat field. I'll never forget this sight. The field was wide, flanked by tall prairie grass, maybe 2 or 3 feet high, stretching out uniformly on both sides. The path cut through the center, leading to a cul-de-sac with 3 weathered buildings, 2 that looked like old farmhouses and 1 that resembled a barn. The wood was stripped of paint, worn down by time and weather, giving the place an abandoned, ghostly vibe. My heart sank. I was done. I wanted to leave right then. But some of my friends, because of course they did, insisted we had to check out the buildings. I put my foot down, and so did the other 2 girls and one of the guys. We'd had enough. The 3 guys who wanted to keep going told us to wait in the field, promising they'd be quick. We didn't want to stand there, exposed in that creepy clearing, but we also couldn't just abandon them. So we stayed, turning off our flashlights since the moonlight was bright enough. The 4 of us huddled together, bitching about how stupid our friends were and making nervous small talk. None of us said it out loud, but we kept glancing at the tall grass, half expecting something to leap out. The whole place felt wrong, like we'd stumbled into a forgotten settlement that didn't want to be found. Our friends seemed to take forever. Finally, we saw them reach one of the buildings and go inside, their flashlights flickering through the windows. Watching them felt like living a horror movie, every second stretching my nerves tighter. After what felt like an eternity, maybe 10 minutes, maybe a tense 5, they came jogging back toward us, and for the first time all night, they looked scared. "You idiots went in there," I snapped, pissed and shaken. One of them, his face pale, looked at us and said words I'll never forget. It was full of bikes. Just bikes, chained to the walls. We didn't believe him at first, waiting for the punchline. But he wasn't joking. They insisted the building was packed with bikes, most of them small, like the ones we'd seen earlier. They looked genuinely freaked out, and as much as I wanted to call bullshit, I believed them. These weren't the kind of guys to drag a prank out this long. That was it. We all agreed it was time to get the hell out of there. We started down the hill, moving as fast as we could without tripping over the fallen trees. About halfway down, we froze. Far below, near where we'd parked, we saw headlights moving slowly past our cars. Someone was down there, and in a place this remote, that could only mean trouble. It was either the cops, ready to bust us for trespassing, or the people who owned this land, people who might call the cops or worse, have darker intentions. We whispered frantically, picking up the pace, practically sprinting now. I'm not a great runner, but I was hauling ass, leaping over logs like my life depended on it. When we reached the bottom, the headlights were gone, but we knew they couldn't be far. "Get in the damn cars," one friend yelled. We fumbled with the doors, our hands shaking like we were in a slasher flick. Just as we piled in and started the engines, headlights roared up behind us, a massive black truck, jacked up high, tearing down the road. In the dark, with its lights blinding us, we couldn't see the driver. It felt larger than life, like a monster bearing down. We peeled out, tires screeching, pedal to the metal. The truck chased us, getting dangerously close, like it was trying to ram us off the road. We were screaming, glancing back, fighting for distance. Once we hit the highway, we weaved through traffic, our sedans nimbler than the truck. The passengers in both cars texted back and forth, trying to make a plan. It took about 15 minutes of heart-pounding chaos to lose them. Maybe the distance was too much or they gave up. We ducked into a Sonic parking lot near a big shopping center, sitting in our cars for a bit, watching for that truck to make sure we were safe. When we finally got out to grab food and talk, everyone was shaken, even the tough guys who'd been acting brave all night. We went over it again and again but couldn't make sense of it. Who was in that truck? Why did they chase us? What was with those bikes? And where were the kids who owned them? We never called the cops, though looking back as an adult, I know we should have. I don't think about it often, usually only in the fall when the air feels like that night. But when I do, the questions haunt me. Who was out there? Why was that place abandoned? And what happened to whoever those bikes belonged to? It all began nearly a decade ago when I was a carefree 10-year-old boy, living in a small town of about 3,000 people where nothing much ever happened. The strangest thing you'd hear about was someone blasting their music too loud on a Saturday night. My dad was the local mechanic, so I'd seen just about everyone in town at least once, their cars rolling into his shop for repairs. Life was simple, predictable, and safe, or so I thought. That sense of security was shattered one summer day, an incident that still sends chills down my spine when I think about it. I was at my best friend Sean's house, playing in his front yard while our parents were out shopping for supplies for an upcoming camping trip. Sean and I were inseparable, always running around, inventing games, and getting into harmless kid stuff. We were tossing a ball back and forth, the sun high and warm, when a dark green Camaro pulled up and stopped right in front of Sean's driveway. I'd never seen the car before, which was odd in a town where every vehicle was familiar. The driver, a man with a lean face and dark sunglasses, leaned out the window and called to us in a voice that was too friendly, too slick. "Hey, kids, either of you want to take a ride in my car?" My stomach twisted instantly. Something about him felt wrong, like a warning bell ringing in my head. Sean, always a little too trusting, opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say a word, I grabbed his shirt and yanked him back. No thanks," I said firmly, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. I dragged Sean toward the house, his sneakers scuffing the grass as he protested. "What the hell was that about?" he yelled once we were inside, slamming the door behind us. He was pissed, thinking I'd overreacted and ruined a chance for some fun. But I knew I'd done the right thing. Sean's heart was in the right place, but his common sense sometimes lagged behind, even now as adults. I didn't explain much, just shrugged it off, and we settled on the couch to watch mindless cartoons until our parents got back. About 30 minutes later, our parents returned, loaded with camping gear, and we didn't mention the guy in the Camaro. Looking back, I regret that silence. I should have said something, anything to warn them. But at the time, I just wanted to forget it and move on. We piled into the cars and drove a few hours to a large lake for the camping trip. That first day was all about setting up tents, unpacking coolers, and eating a quick dinner by the fire. The strange encounter faded to the back of my mind as I focused on the excitement of being out in the woods with my friends. The next day, Sean, his older brother Shane, Shane's friend Tyler, and I were splashing around in the lake, playing games and dunking each other in the shallow water. The sun glinted off the surface, and laughter filled the air. But out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone moving toward us, slow and deliberate. As he got closer, my heart sank. It was him, the man from the Camaro. Same lean build, same unsettling vibe, though he wasn't wearing sunglasses this time. His eyes were cold, locked on us. I froze, the water lapping at my knees, and tugged Shane aside. He was 14, the oldest in our group, and the one I trusted to handle this. In a hushed voice, I told him about the guy, how he creeped me out at Sean's house, and how he was here now watching us. Shane's face hardened. He waded out of the water and marched straight up to the man, his shoulders squared. "Hey, leave us alone," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Don't follow us." The man's expression twisted, like he was offended that a kid dared to talk to him like that. Without warning, he swung his fist and punched Shane square in the face. Shane stumbled back, blood trickling from his nose, but he didn't go down. I sprinted toward the campsite, my legs pumping, shouting for help. By the time I reached Sean's dad, Mike, the man was still hitting Shane, landing blow after blow while Sean and Tyler stood frozen, too shocked to move. Mike was a giant of a man, over 7 feet tall, with a presence that commanded respect. He stormed to the lake, his face the mask of fury. Without hesitation, he grabbed the man by the neck, lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing, and hurled him into the water. The man splashed and flailed, coughing as he tried to stand. Mike pulled a handgun from his waistband, pointed it at the man, and roared, "Get the hell away from my sons. If I ever see you again, you won't like what happens." Mike wasn't someone you messed with. When he made a promise, he meant it. The man scrambled out of the water, dripping and wild-eyed, and bolted into the trees without looking back. We rushed Shane back to the campsite, his face a mess of blood and swelling. We cleaned him up, trying to figure out where the blood was coming from. Shane, still shaken but tough as nails, admitted he'd grabbed a rock from the lake bed and smashed it into the man's head during a fight. That explained the gash we finally found on his scalp, hidden under his hair. The whole ordeal left us rattled. We decided to cut the trip short, packing up our gear and leaving the lake behind. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts, the memory of the man's cold eyes and violent fists lingering like a bad dream. For almost 2 months, I didn't see or hear anything about him. I started to believe we were in the clear, that he'd moved on or been scared off by Mike's threat. But that hope shattered one night when I heard tapping outside my bedroom window. It was soft at first, like a branch brushing the glass, but it grew louder, more insistent. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight and the small pocket knife my grandfather had given me when I turned 10. I crept to the window, my bare feet cold against the floor, and flicked on a light. I froze. There he was, the man from the Camaro, his face pressed close to the glass, his breath fogging the pain. His eyes locked onto mine, and he mouthed words that made my blood run cold. I don't like it when children disobey me. They need to be punished. He started prying at the window, his fingers clawing at the frame, trying to force it open. My body screamed to move, but fear rooted me to the spot. Finally, I forced myself to take a few steps back, my hands trembling. He shoved harder, and the window slid up with a groan. He raised his fist, ready to climb through. An instinct took over. I lunged forward and slashed at his face with my pocket knife, catching his right cheek. It wasn't a deep cut, but it was enough. He flinched, blood welling up, and I seized the moment to sprint out of my room, yelling for my parents. My dad burst in, a shotgun in his hands, but the room was empty. The window was closed, as if it had never been opened, and the only sign of the intruder was a small puddle of blood on the floor. My mom called the police while my dad checked every corner of the house, his grip tight on the gun. We packed a few things and went to a motel for the night, hoping the police would catch the bastard who'd been terrorizing us. The next day, the chief of police called my dad with news. They tested the blood from my floor and got a match. Damon Matthews, a known pedophile with a horrific record. He'd lure his victims, use them, and then kill them. He had multiple warrants out for his arrest across several states. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a creepy guy. He was a monster, and he'd been after me and my friends. I don't know if they ever caught him, but I never saw him again. Still, the memory of his face at my window, those words he mouthed, haunts me. I keep my knife close, even now, just in case. Back when I was 14, I was a trans guy navigating the rough waters of high school in a small town. Bullying was a daily reality, and I didn't have many friends to lean on. But the two I did have, let's call them Bob and Dave, were the best people I'd ever met. They were a couple of years older, just starting their first year of college, but they never treated me like a kid. We bonded over our shared love of adventure, especially exploring the abandoned houses scattered around our town. There were plenty of them, old relics of a time when the area was busier, and we never ran out of creepy places to poke around in. It was our thing, a way to escape the monotony and the taunts I faced at school. One particular day, most of the town's teens were at some big party, but I hadn't been invited. No surprise there. I was used to being left out. Bob and Dave, true to form, showed up at my place to cheer me up. They brought drinks, snacks, and their usual infectious enthusiasm. "Let's go check out that house in the woods," Dave suggested, his eyes gleaming with excitement. It was a small abandoned house we'd heard rumors about, tucked a bit outside town, surrounded by dense trees. People whispered it was haunted, but we didn't buy into that stuff. We figured it'd be another fun outing, just the three of us exploring and laughing off the so-called ghost stories. So we piled into Dave's beat-up truck, snacks in hand, and drove out to the woods. The house wasn't too far, but the path through the trees felt like stepping into another world. The air was cool, the sunlight filtering weakly through the canopy, and the crunch of leaves under our feet was the only sound. When we reached the house, it looked every bit as eerie as the rumors promised. The wood was weathered, paint peeling in long strips, and the windows were either boarded up or shattered. Vines snaked up the walls, giving it a forgotten, almost alive quality. Dave didn't hesitate. He marched up to the front door, gave it a solid kick, and it splintered open with a groan. We exchanged grins, adrenaline buzzing, and stepped inside. The interior was a mess. Dust hung thick in the air, catching the beams of sunlight that slipped through the broken windows. Old furniture lay overturned, covered in grime, and the floorboards creaked with every step. We moved room to room, our phone flashlights cutting through the gloom. The kitchen had a rusted sink and cabinets hanging off their hinges. The living room held a moldy couch and a cracked coffee table. It was creepy but familiar, exactly the kind of place we loved exploring. Bob cracked jokes about the ghosts probably being annoyed at us for trespassing, and I laughed, feeling at ease with my friends. But things started to feel off as we climbed the stairs to the second floor. On the steps, we found a torn piece of fabric, stained with something dark and crusty, blood, I realized with a jolt. Next to it lay a knife, its blade dull but menacing in the dim light. My heart skipped a beat. I'd been trained in hand-to-hand combat, a skill I'd picked up to feel safer in a world that often felt hostile, so I bent down and grabbed the knife, clutching it tightly. Just in case, I muttered, trying to sound braver than I felt. Bob and Dave nodded, their faces serious now. We kept moving, but the air felt heavier, like the house was watching us. At the top of the stairs, Bob suddenly stopped, making me bump into him. "Shoo," he whispered, holding up a hand. "Can you hear that?" We froze, straining our ears. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching, like someone dragging a nail across the floorboards above us. My stomach dropped, and I gripped the knife so hard my knuckles ached. I was scared out of my mind, my pulse racing, but I didn't want to admit it. Bob, always the boldest, took a step toward the sound, peeking around the corner of the hallway. The scratching grew louder, more deliberate, and then a scream. It was piercing, raw, and utterly terrifying, echoing through the house like a warning. I couldn't move. My body locked up, my breath caught in my throat. Fear crashed over me like a wave, and I felt a panic attack creeping in, my chest tightening, my vision blurring. "Bob, come on," Dave shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. He grabbed my arm, half dragging, half carrying me as we bolted down the stairs. My legs felt like jelly, but Dave's grip kept me moving. We burst out of the house and sprinted to the truck, the scream still ringing in my ears. Dave practically threw me into the passenger seat, jumped in, and floored it, the tires kicking up dirt as we peeled away from that cursed place. The drive back was a blur. My panic attack started to ease, my breathing slowing as the woods fell away behind us. Dave kept glancing at Bob, who was slumped in the back seat, staring out the window, completely out of it. "What did you see?" Dave asked, his voice low. But Bob didn't answer. He just shook his head, his face pale, his eyes distant. We didn't push him. Whatever he'd seen had shaken him to his core, and that scared me more than the scream itself. We dropped Bob off at his place, then Dave took me home. I crawled into bed, still clutching the knife, and tried to convince myself it was just our imaginations running wild. It wasn't until 10 years later, just a few days ago, that I got the full story. I met up with Bob and Dave for drinks, catching up like old times. The conversation turned to that day, and Bob finally opened up. His voice was steady but heavy, like he was unburdening something he'd carried for years. He told us that when he peeked around the corner, he saw a homeless man in the hallway. The man was crouched over a body, a knife in his hand, and he was eating it. Bob said the man's eyes locked onto his, and that's when he screamed, a guttural, animalistic sound that didn't seem human. Bob stumbled back, and that's when Dave grabbed me, and we ran. I sat there stunned, the memory of that day flooding back. The bloody fabric, the knife, the scratching, it all made sense in the worst way possible. We didn't talk much after that, just sat in silence, each of us grappling with the horror of what we'd stumbled into. I don't know if the man was still there, or if the body was even real, but I know Bob believed every word he said. And I believe him. That house was no place for us, and I'll never set foot in another abandoned building again. The fear from that day still lingers, a reminder that some places are better left alone. I'm a 19-year-old college student from Indonesia, a country in Southeast Asia, still living with my parents in a quiet neighborhood where nothing much ever happens. At 5 feet tall and about 150 pounds, I'm average for my area, blending into the familiar rhythm of my small community. Our street is peaceful, with the occasional troublemaker causing a stir by messing with people's property on weekends, but it's far from a bad area. I've known my neighbors my whole life, and they're kind, dependable folks who make the place feel like home. Growing up here, I've always had a sense of security, a comfort that let me wander the streets or stay up late without a second thought. But one night in mid-February, that sense of safety was shattered in a way I'll never forget. It was during a 2-week holiday from campus, a rare break from the grind of college life. My parents were away on a religious trip to Mecca. Yes, I'm Muslim, in case you're wondering, and they wouldn't be back for at least another 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. I was left alone at home with our housekeeper, who sometimes stayed overnight but often left to return in the early morning. This wasn't the first time I'd been on my own for an extended period, so I wasn't fazed. As a college student, staying up late was second nature. I'd spend hours in front of my laptop, watching YouTube videos, catching up on new content, or playing video games when the mood struck. I'd frequently slip out to the kitchen for a drink, the house quiet except for the hum of my computer and the occasional creak of the floorboards. The first few nights were uneventful, just me sinking into my routine of late-night gaming and streaming. I'd stay up until 3 a.m. sometimes, lost in my own world. But on the 5th night, everything changed. I was in my room chatting with my friend, let's call him Pac, over voice chat while he streamed a game on Steam. The clock on my laptop read around 1:40 a.m., and I was slouched in my chair, half watching his gameplay, when I heard footsteps. They were coming from the second floor, right above my room. My dad's a fashion designer who works from home, and the room above mine is a storage space filled with fabrics and supplies. It's always empty at night, no one has any reason to be up there. "Dude, did you hear that?" I asked Pac, my voice low, as if speaking too loudly might make the sound real. He paused his game, turning down the volume. "No, I didn't hear anything," he replied, sounding skeptical. I strained my ears, hoping it was just my imagination, but the silence was deafening. "I'm serious," I started to say, but before I could finish, the footsteps came again, loud and unmistakable. They were heavy, like someone wearing boots was pacing across the ceramic floor. My heart jolted, and I stared at the ceiling, tracking the sound. Pac heard it too this time. "Okay, that's something," he said, his tone shifting to concern. "You might think it was the housekeeper, but I knew it couldn't be. None of us wear shoes inside, and the floors are all ceramic. Slippers or bare feet don't make that kind of noise." These were deliberate, stomping steps, like someone was making their presence known. "You think I should check?" I asked Pac, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound brave. He let out a small, annoyed sigh. "Man, I really don't recommend that. Is anyone else in the house?" I shook my head, then remembered he couldn't see me. "No, just me." Still, I couldn't just sit there. If it was a burglar, or worse, I had to protect my home. I stood, my hands already shaking, and carefully opened my bedroom door, moving slowly to avoid making noise. I crept to the kitchen, my eyes darting to every shadow, and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, a hefty chef's knife with a gleaming blade. Its weight felt reassuring, even if my nerves were screaming. I made my way to the stairs, the second-floor lights glowing softly. My dad always kept them on, a habit from his late-night work sessions, and I'd been scolded before for trying to turn them off, so I left them be. The footsteps had stopped, the house now eerily silent. I climbed the stairs, each step feeling like a plunge into the unknown, and approached the storage room door. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I stood outside the door listening, but there was nothing, just silence. "Damn it," I muttered, psyching myself up. I kicked the door open, hoping the sudden move would startle any intruder. "Get the hell out of my house," I yelled, my voice echoing in the empty space. But the room was just as I expected, silent, filled with neatly stacked fabrics and nothing else. No one was there. I stood there, dumbfounded, my adrenaline still surging. I've been so sure I'd find someone. Shaking my head, I checked the rest of the first floor, knife in hand, peering into every corner and closet. Everything was exactly as it should be. No signs of a break-in, no misplaced items. I started to wonder if I'd imagined it all. I returned to my room, slid my headset back on, and reconnected with Pac. "Anything?" he asked, his voice tense. "Nothing but silence," I replied, trying to sound calm. "I checked everywhere." We laughed it off nervously, but my hands were still trembling. I'd been brave or reckless, going up there alone, but the thought of someone lurking in a dark room, staring at me with a strange smile, sent shivers down my spine. I settled back into my chair, trying to focus on Pac's dream, but about 15 minutes later, the noise started again. This time, the footsteps were faster, closer together, like someone was jogging lightly above me. Pac heard it too. "Dude, what the hell is that?" he said, his voice rising with panic, which only made my own fear spike. "I don't know," I whispered, my eyes glued to the ceiling. "I checked the whole house. There's no one here but me." Before I could say more, the voice chat cut off abruptly, connection dropping without warning. My head snapped up, my senses on high alert. The room felt different now, like the air had thickened. I got that prickling feeling you get when someone's watching you, a nagging instinct that something was wrong. I stood and walked toward my door, my heart hammering, the knife still clutched tightly. As I reached for the knob, it turned slowly, deliberately, and the door began to creak open. Panic took over. I didn't think, I just acted. With a surge of fear-fueled strength, I slammed my body against the door, forcing it shut with a loud bang. My fingers fumbled with the deadlock, sliding into place as my breath came in short gasps. I stumbled back to the center of my room, gripping the knife, my eyes darting to every corner. The footsteps had moved. They were no longer above me, but right outside my door. The doorknob jiggled, a soft rattle that sent my pulse skyrocketing. "Get the hell away from me," I shouted, my voice cracking with a mix of fear and frustration. The jiggling stopped, and for a moment I thought I'd scared whatever it was away. I was wrong. A deafening bang shook the door, like someone had thrown their full weight against it. I flinched, nearly dropping the knife, my body tensing as the sound echoed in my room. Another bang followed, then another, each one louder, more forceful. It felt like the door wouldn't hold for long, the wood creaking under the assault. The noise burrowed into my head, disorienting me, making my thoughts scatter. I stood frozen, teeth gritted, caught between confusion and terror. I'm not usually superstitious, but this was something else, something I couldn't explain. No matter what people say about these things being fake, it's different when you're living it, alone in the dark with something trying to get in. The banging went on for what felt like an eternity, 2 hours, my memory tells me, though it's hazy. My mind went blank, overwhelmed by the relentless noise and the fear of what might be on the other side. I felt dazed, like I was slipping out of reality. At some point, I set the knife on my desk, worried I'd hurt myself if I passed out. Everything blurred, my vision swimming, my body heavy. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor, jolted awake by a knock at my door, different this time, softer, more familiar. It was my housekeeper, his voice calling through the wood. "Are you okay?" I scrambled to my feet, my hands shaking as I undid the deadlock and flung the door open. There he was, looking confused, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. I must have been a mess, sweaty, pale, my clothes rumpled from lying on the floor. "What happened?" he asked, but I couldn't find the words. I just stood there, catching my breath, relief flooding through me at the sight of another person. I thought I'd never hear a friendly voice again. I told some of my friends about that night, but most brushed it off as my imagination running wild. The thing is, Pac heard it too. Those footsteps, the urgency in his voice when the noises started again. I don't know what was in my house that night, whether it was humans, something else, or just my mind playing tricks under the weight of fear. But I know what I felt, what I heard, and the terror of those hours alone. I've never stayed up that late by myself since, and I double-check the locks every night, just in case. I'm a 16-year-old girl, and a few nights ago, I was babysitting for a family I knew but whose house I'd never been to before. It was a new setting, a sprawling suburban home with creaky floors and unfamiliar shadows, but I was excited for the gig. The night started off slow and easy, the kind of babysitting job you dream about. The kids, 3 boys named Colton, Luke, and an unnamed third aged 3, 5, and 6, respectively, and a 10-year-old girl named Brinley, were full of energy. We played a game where they pretended to be Pokemon, scampering around the living room while I acted as their trainer, catching them in imaginary Pokeballs. Their laughter filled the house, and I felt at ease, settling into the role of the cool babysitter. After a while, we plopped down on the couch to watch a show, the kids sprawled out with blankets and snacks. I was scrolling through apps on my phone, keeping one eye on them, when 5-year-old Colton tugged at my sleeve. "Can we go outside and look for Pokemon on Pokemon Go?" he asked, his eyes wide with excitement. I pulled up the app and saw a Pokestop nearby at a park. It seemed like a fun way to burn off their energy, so I agreed. Since I didn't know where the house key was, and I figured we'd only be gone a short while, I made a rookie mistake. I left the front door unlocked. We bundled up, the kids chattering excitedly, and headed to the park. They took turns swiping at my phone, chasing virtual Pokemon under the fading daylight. As dusk settled in, the air turned chilly, and I herded them back to the house, their cheeks flushed from running around. Back inside, we picked up where we left off, watching more shows until it was bedtime for the younger 3. Around 8 p.m., Brinley helped me wrangle the boys upstairs, tucking them into their beds with stories and promises of pancakes in the morning. With the boys settled, Brinley and I returned to the living room. She was a sweet kid, mature for her age, and we bonded over art. I showed her some of my sketches, and she grabbed a notebook to draw pictures for me. We sat at the dining table, markers and pencils scattered around, chatting about school and her favorite cartoons. It was a cozy moment, the kind that makes babysitting feel less like a job and more like hanging out with a younger sibling. Then a cry broke the calm. It was Luke, the 6-year-old, sobbing from upstairs. I bolted up the stairs, Brinley close behind, and found him sitting up in bed, his face streaked with tears. "What's wrong?" I asked, kneeling beside him. His voice trembled as he said he didn't like being alone and thought he'd heard something under the bed. I softened, assuming he was just missing his parents and spooked by the dark. I checked under the bed, shining my phone's flashlight to show him it was empty, but his wide eyes told me he wasn't convinced. Brinley stepped in, her voice gentle. "I can sleep in his bed so he's not scared," she offered. I was touched by her kindness. "That's so sweet of you," I said, helping her grab a blanket and pillow. I tucked them both in, Luke clinging to Brinley's arm, and left them to settle down, their soft whispers fading as I headed back downstairs. I sank onto the couch, scrolling through my phone again, the house quiet except for the hum of the TV on low. I was starting to relax, thinking the night was winding down smoothly, when a scream shattered the silence. Brinley, yelling my name with raw panic. My heart lurched. I dropped my phone and sprinted upstairs, my sneakers pounding the steps. The 3 boys came tumbling down the hall toward me, their faces pale, eyes wide with fear. Luke was crying so hard his eyes were bloodshot, his words stumbling out in gasps. "Someone grab Brinley," he choked. They pulled her off the bed and under it. My mind went blank, instinct taking over. "Run next door," I shouted at the boys, pointing toward the stairs. They didn't hesitate, scrambling down and out the front door to the neighbor's house. I tore into Luke and Brinley's room, my pulse racing, fear and adrenaline pumping through me. I'm not a small girl, 5 feet 9 inches, 200 pounds, all muscle from weightlifting at school. People have called me intimidating, but I'm not confrontational by nature. Still, I knew I had to protect Brinley, no matter what. The room was dark, the only light coming from a nightlight casting eerie shadows. I scanned the space, seeing nothing at first, until a faint gasp drew my eyes to the bed. Brinley's leg was visible, sticking out from under it, and then it vanished, yanked out of sight. My heart pounded, but I didn't have time to think. I dropped to my knees, ready to dive under the bed, when I heard sirens in the distance. Police, probably called by the neighbors after the boys' frantic explanation. The sound must have spooked whoever was under there, because I heard shuffling, and then a man emerged. He was tall, about 6 feet, scrawny, with filthy clothes that hung off his frame. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild and bloodshot, locking onto mine with a venomous glare. "This is all your fault," he snarled, his voice low and menacing, before he bolted out of the room. I heard his footsteps thunder down the stairs, then the unmistakable echo of the garage door opening, a hollow, metallic sound that set it apart from the rest of the house. I didn't chase him. My priority was Brinley. I crawled under the bed, my shoulders scraping the frame, and found her curled up, trembling, her eyes wide with terror. "It's okay, I've got you," I whispered, pulling her into my arms. She clung to me, sobbing into my shoulder as I carried her downstairs. The police were already inside, their flashlights sweeping the living room, thanks to the boys' quick thinking. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, my legs shaky, and pointed toward the garage. "He went that way," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. One officer nodded and led a team to check it out, while another escorted me and Brinley outside to where the boys were waiting with the neighbors. The boys ran to me, their faces pale but relieved, and I hugged them tightly, Brinley still in my arms. Moments later, I saw the police leading the man out in handcuffs, his head bowed but his eyes still fixed on me with that same soul-piercing glare. It sent a shiver down my spine, his words, "This is all your fault," echoing in my head. The police later pieced together that he'd likely slipped into the house while we were at the park, taking advantage of the unlocked door. But a darker thought gnawed at me. What if he'd been there the whole time, hiding, waiting for the perfect moment when we were all vulnerable? I don't know what he planned to do, or why he blamed me. Maybe he meant the unlocked door, or maybe it was something twisted in his own mind. All I know is that I'll never leave a house unlocked again, not even for a second. The kids were safe, thank God, but the memory of Brinley's scream, the sight of that man's face, and the weight of my mistake will stay with me forever. I held Brinley a little tighter as we waited for their parents, vowing to be more careful, to never let my guard down again.